for that insight. I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of the fact that we look at leadership only from a corporate perspective, but when you talk about anyone being a leader, right? Because at the end of the day, when you go through your career, when you go through life, you need to have these principles in life. And when we were chatting outside, you mentioned, so like I said, while people want to understand the process you go through in terms of getting from where you were to where you are. But you mentioned an anecdote about a screaming leader, which kind of was the trigger. So, why don't you tell us a little more about that?
I guess I have to tell you a very short story. It has to be short because there's a timer. The short story essentially is a question I get asked time and again. So what made you write this book on coaching and leadership? Or you're a coach yourself. But the truth of the matter is, until very recently, and I still am, I was a hard-nosed strategy consultant. I'm an academic. I teach leadership and strategy at several business schools, right? Coaching was a very alien concept to me. I never thought of myself as a coach. I thought of coaching as this very amorphous, fluid activity which doesn't have a beginning or an end. And more importantly, you can't measure it in numbers, right? So what does coaching do for you? And so, to your point, a few years earlier, I was the Asia Pacific strategy head for a large financial services organization. And in the boardroom, I had the APAC CEO yell at me. Those days, I think people yelled and got away with it. Now, it's not so easy. But he yelled at me for an error in the balance sheet, which somebody in the team had done, which was okay. He was rude and out of line, but that made me question a lot of my priorities and said, what am I really doing here? And more importantly, am I growing? Is anybody adding any value to me? And I found there was a complete vacuum of any kind of enablement or any kind of growth for me. And that made me really question a lot of this. And so to me, as I look around, if I look at my careers, and this is an example of things that didn't go right, but I've also had some fantastic clients. I've had bosses. I've had, just colleagues who have been fabulous coaches. What does that mean? What is coaching, right? It's not just this amorphous, nebulous term. If you see the visual of my book, it is a big knot in our head, right? Because we all have such busy lives. We have work, we have domestic challenges, we have things to sort. These thoughts become really big knots in our head. What does a coach do for you? A coach helps you untangle those knots. Really, gives you perspective. But more than that, a coach is just not a therapist who's untangling it. A coach helps you go higher. And when you go higher, you take everybody along with you. So it's time for us to start asking our colleagues, asking for opinions, ensuring that it's not always telling people that, hey, I'm the expert in the room. When we do that, we all are in a better place. And that's what the book is about. And that's, I guess, long-winded answer to your question is that's how I embrace coaching, because I realized that I wasn't growing. University of Chicago called me and said, hey, we need a coach. And I said, are you nuts? I don't know the first thing about coaching. I'm a boring strategy consultant. But when I started to do this, I realized in a sense, that's what I was doing. I was untangling knots in leaders' heads. And because I had done this, right, in the corporate world, I wasn't someone who just one fine day woke up and became a coach. I could understand their trials and tribulations. I understand what was going inside their heads. So I was able to help them decode and untangle those knots slightly better.
So, I think, of course, untangling the knots these days, we have knots in our heads because of COVID also, all the brain fog that's going around. So, obviously, that was your key trigger, kind of, that you had people talking to you, and then you knew that you would do this. But you had like a long-winded corporate career, and then you've gotten into coaching. And so then when the opportunity came to, put this together in a book, obviously, some people who may be potentially budding authors would like to actually understand the process as well, in terms of how you got about there, very briefly. But when you have to put together what you've been doing or what you want to convey in a book, what's the process that goes in your head? Because ultimately it's going to be, you don't want to write a 400-page book which no one reads, right?
Mine is 386 pages, by the way. And it is a big book.
Okay, 600 pages that nobody reads.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm actually slightly a bad example. I was listening to my predecessor before this. My book happened because I had moved to India from Singapore, which was 5 years ago. And honestly, knots in my head, but I was also pulling out my hair. I didn't have much work here because I used to teach and work largely in Asia Pacific and Middle East. And I didn't quite know what to do with my life. And one of my friends who was at Mint said, hey, you've constantly been writing overseas. Why won't you write for us? So I started writing a column for the Mint, which was on coaching and conflict management. I mean, you can Google it. And then we started doing a series on leader as coach. It was a very telling thing because I have never felt like such a celebrity, not even with my book. The number of people who would write to me saying, this is fabulous. And I don't think it's about vacuum of writing. I think it's just that we have never been at this intersection of leadership and coaching, right? A lot of people related to this. And I got fortunate. Somebody at Penguin saw it and they said, this book has huge potential. So yeah, that's a good part, right? You can say that I got lucky, somebody saw my writing and landed in my lap. But the process, as you're saying, for me was not an easy road because I'm not an author. I'm an academic and I'm a strategy consultant. I was very disorganized. It's that quote, right? It's like you're driving in the night with your headlights on, but all you can see is the next few meters. The road ahead is so lonely and it is so long, you have no idea whether you're making progress. And I found it very daunting. I found it incredibly lonely, distressing, and I had no idea if what I was writing was garbage or was any good. I guess my simple sort of advice to people who want to do this is that surround yourselves with friends. Friends who are not just cheerleaders, but friends who are coaches and give you like tough love, who tell you, listen, this just doesn't sound right, or this is crap, it's okay. So I handpicked a few friends, some colleagues, some people you trust who want you to shine bright. So I picked a few people, my spouse, who I used to have huge fights with, but that's part of the journey, I think. My brother, he keeps saying all the cricket stuff is all his, to his credit, right? I mean, I really don't know much about cricket, so there's a lot of cricket in my book, by the way. So I think you have to surround yourself with people who give you positive energy, people that you touch base with. And yes, editing wasn't my forte either. I would write and write and write, and then it would look like crap to me. But it's always nice to have someone who can help you distill your thinking, crystallize your thinking, look at it, ask you intelligent questions. So I think you need to do that. You need friends, you need coaches, you need mentors, those that give you guidance. You need people like, I had my university professor, University of Chicago, and he would constantly say, listen, you're an academic, your book is lovely, but it doesn't have a model. You've been quoting different people. What is your original thinking, right? So you need people to trigger your thinking to help you become better than you are. So I guess that's my single message to that, so that people can keep you on track and so that you are successful in your journey to become that author. And yeah, it's not easy.
I'm sure it's a bit of a road, but you do have more coming up, right, in the pipeline. So while we'd love to understand a little bit, at least in terms of what we can expect further from you, but I have a question in terms of the vocation that you're pursuing now, right? Now, obviously, you also mentioned when we spoke earlier that coaching was never considered to be a part of the corporate building process or just organizational behavior, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen that change? And what's the key change that you've seen in the past few years?
I think it's changed tremendously from the time that University of Chicago asked me to be their resident coach, and I sort of smiled at them and said, this is not what I do. I'm a hard-nosed strategy consultant. I think this world has changed dramatically because more than ever, post-pandemic, we've realized that we can't do it all alone. And especially if you're a senior leader in an organization, it's even more telling. Because when you're at the top of the pyramid, who's giving you feedback? Who's telling you how you're performing? Who do you go to when you have doubts? So I think we all need somebody in our life who can be that sounding board, who can be non-judgmental, who can trigger our thinking, who can not tell us what to do, as I said earlier, who can ask us the right questions. When you ask people the right questions, you trigger the thinking. And a lot of the models that I built, interestingly, are not academic models like that. My son, who's 12, he was watching Kung Fu Panda for I don't know how, the 50th time, I think, and I was passing by and I kind of stopped. And I realized that a lot of these corporate lessons are embedded in everyday life. So watch Kung Fu Panda. You'll realize what the Master Shiho is saying. The answers lie within us. We know those answers. When we surround ourselves with these coaches, and when they ask us powerful questions, it gives us first clarity. More than anything else, the untangling gives you clarity. Second, it gives you consciousness, right? Consciousness is just a fancy word for self-awareness. We know what we're good at, but we also have to be aware of what we're not so good at. The third piece is confidence. More than ever, and I propagate this so much for our women leaders, aspiring or otherwise, It's not about capability. It's not about competence. It's confidence. Confidence to believe in yourself and surge forward. We all need that dose of confidence. And a good coach can do that for you. And I guess the last thing, and if you don't get that, it's not good coaching, it's capability. You have to become better than you were yesterday. You have to amass new skills. You have to start thinking differently. And you have to stop thinking just in the immediate term. You have to think beyond the horizon. And when you do that, you become a better leader, regardless of which sphere you are or which genre you're in.
Right. So, I think great insights. I think we've got some free coaching as well today. And I think I need to kind of have an interview with the son also, because we've, both watched Kung Fu Panda the same number of times, right? So, but great. Thanks for that, Ruchira. Before we wrap up with any questions, anyone from the, lots of hands. So I think let's
untangle a few questions from here, keeping an eye on the timer. Okay. So how many questions do you think we can take? Please suggest. I want to be unbiased to go to whichever. Let's start here.
Yeah. No, so people rise in position, but not the mind. My question to you is, could you give an example of a good leader whom you and why you consider that person?
Absolutely. Many examples, so I have to be conscious of time. Well, Satya Nadella is someone I've met personally. He's my senior at the University of Chicago, but I don't know him. But I've also talked about Microsoft as a case study in the book, right? What he did, and very briefly, when he came on the helm in 2014, Microsoft was completely broken, right? It had nosedived. It wasn't just about the earnings or the profit, but the culture was considered very toxic. And while he did many, many things right, business strategy, infused, he talked about AI, he talked about cloud computing. But if you read his interviews, it's never about that. It's about him saying the C in the CEO stands for culture. He tried to rebuild a broken Microsoft by focusing on the cultural aspects. And the first thing he did was he listened to people. To honestly, a trait that is in short supply when it comes to our leaders. He spent a full year, along with Kathleen Hogan, who is head of HR. They listened to everybody across the organization. And it didn't matter if you were a senior vice president or if you were someone at the bottom of the value chain. Apparently, he gave everybody the same focus and the same attention. And after the year-long listening exercise, they came up with a building block. And it's called Coach Model Care. So it says everybody, regardless of your title, regardless of the size of your team, has to be a coach, which means you have to enable others. Two, you have to care. You have to genuinely look after people in your teams. And the last bit is you have to be a role model. Unless you can show people the way, you can't expect that out of them. And of course, there's a lot of literature on it, not just my book. The book has a case study, but if you Google it, you'll find lots of fantastic literature, including a London Business School case study. So yeah, he's truly an uncommon leader for me.
We'll take one more. Pass the mic to sir, behind you.
Behind you, man.
Just behind you, the red.
We'll come to you.
We'll come to you.
Thank you.
We'll take both the questions.
Yeah, so to make it quick, first of all, thanks a lot. You opened a lot of things, but I'll just focus on one question. It's regarding that normally I've seen the leadership level coaching. It's like where people are sitting in the room and they are doing it, but most of them are either on the phone or something answering or replying to their own business issues. So normally it's to keep them engaged. Is that good idea to not to have only focus on the grades or something, but to make it at the level of the involvement or the things which they should be focusing on, kind of. So I might be not good in the say presenting a lot of things. So let me be in the group where people are of same kind of, or say those people are involved, yeah, something like that.
No, I understand, and I think it's a controversial statement, but one of the things I talk about in the book is the super chicken model, right? We in organizations, in nations, in sports, we sort of believe that your best player becomes your captain of the ship, right? So Sachin Tendulkar is the best cricketer the world has ever seen, but you think about his captaincy, it's largely forgotten, the darkest times in his career, right? Does it imply that just because you were the best performer, whether it's in corporate life or whether in sport, you will become the best captain of the ship? Actually, history has shown us otherwise. I think it's time we have to start rethinking this leadership model. It's about potential, not performance. Does everybody have it in them to take others along in the journey? Do we have to coach them to be leaders? Can't they just be fantastic individual performers? Does everybody need to have perfect presentation skills? It's okay if you don't. You're doing a great job. And frankly, not everybody wants to be a leader. We as society impose this burden on them. Title, size of my team, etc. We have to start rethinking this whole paradigm and say, give people different career tracks, give people the acceptance that you can thrive without being this so-called senior leader, because not everybody wants to do it, and not everybody has it in them to be leaders. Yeah, like Sachin lost a lot of his game, right? And he says it in his own words. And you see that with a lot of fantastic players. And we don't need that to happen time and again.
One more question. Yes.
Hi Ruchira, thanks for very insightful session. I read this book last year, found it really amazing. I work at Tata and TCS. I know you have been there in the past, but as a large organization, we would see in the past that leadership coaching was primarily available at the topmost senior level.
Yes.
How do you see that changing with coaching becoming a key enabler for people to grow, as you rightly said, especially at middle level and mid-senior level? What can organization do differently to enable coaching in their culture?
It's a very good question. And that is the crux of the book. Every leader in the organization needs to be a leader coach. We have to truly embed a culture where everybody needs to believe that building the next line of leaders is your responsibility. And as you're rightly saying, it can't happen overnight. But organizations have to start infusing a culture. If we want people to get that clarity, that confidence, that capability and consciousness, you can only make it come alive with that last C, which is culture. A little bit like what Satya Nadella did. We have to not just tell people, hey, when you coach someone, it's good for them. I think it's time to start telling them that when you coach and build others, it's also good for you. Because when you build others, you become more strategic. You have more time to focus on your strategic areas. And yes, you leave behind a legacy. But I think it's time that we start building a very powerful business case for why every individual in every organization has to consciously build the next line of leaders. So yes, give them the skills, do all the training, but that training won't go anywhere unless they truly believe that this is the role of every individual in an organization. And the organizations that have done it right, like a Levers or a Microsoft, they truly, they have truly embedded that into the whole architecture of the organization, into the culture, and in the way they routinely interact with each other. Giving the bureaucracy giving way to informal systems. And you just don't tell people, hey, you've got a coach. You have to build it into your system, which means you evaluate people. So are you going to promote someone who had the maximum revenue per quarter? Or are you also somehow finding a metrics to evaluate that person in terms of how much attrition you had in your team? So we have to start rethinking this model. It's not a soft topic. I mean, I went to University of Chicago. We just talk numbers, right? So coaching is not soft and fuzzy. If we want to infuse it into the culture of our organization, we have to build it into our metrics and measure what matters. That'll change the paradigm as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ruchira. I think great insights, great book, and we look forward to many more from you and many more sessions like this with you. Thank you.